All right, here we go. Welcome everyone to the Mixed Plate Podcast, a Plowline production. I am your host, Gerry Tannell. God, I can't even say my own name. Today we'll be talking with Kelsay Meyer, a professional writer, artist, and registered somatic movement educator living in Marin County, California, on the coast of Miwok land. But before we get started, one of the first things I'd like to do is honor the land in which our feet stand. And I will begin by acknowledging that those of us who are gathering in the Seattle, Washington area north, we are on the ancestral homelands of the Coast Salish people who have lived in the Salish Sea Basin since time immemorial. We respect this place and honor the sacred spiritual connection to the land, water, and its people, past, present, and future. By acknowledging these lands and their original indigenous inhabitants, we reach back to our own indigenous roots and reflect on the impacts of colonialism and the lands from which all our people come. We're connected to our ancestors through this connection to land, for the land is what connects us all. It is also critical to acknowledge that this country would not exist if it wasn't for the free enslaved labor of Black people and the contributions of Chinese railroad workers in helping complete the most important construction project in the mid-19th century America. To add to the mix of acknowledgement that our country has failed to do, I'd like to also honor the Filipino Manongs who played a significant role in building the farm workers movements in the 1920s and 30s, organizing and striking alongside Mexican immigrants, Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta. It is critical for us to honor the legacy of the African, Asian, Indigenous, and Native diaspora and the knowledge to care for these lands and the skills to build the America we all share today. So please join me in taking a moment to honor the land, to the traditional people and the territory in which you stand. Today, I honor the Tulalip tribes and allied bands for their enduring care and protection of this land. And I also honor the life and labor of the Black, Asian, Native, and Indigenous communities by expressing my deepest respect and gratitude. So thank you so much, Kelsay, for being here with me. It's been a long time since you and I actually hung out together. And you said it's been 3 years. So it was like a year before the pandemic hit.
Yeah. Or 2 years. It's been a while.
Right, because how long have you been in Marin County? Because you were in Walnut Creek before, right?
Right. So I moved to Marin in 2019, early 2019.
Okay. So the last time I saw you was right before you were moving from Walnut Creek.
Yeah, so about 3 years.
Yeah, that's a long time. That's a long time, but I'm so glad. So I wanted to thank you for coming onto the podcast, because you put something on social media that I was so intrigued by as being a transnational adoptee. And you have it to where it was called Soul Expressions, but you had the E in the parentheses and OUL, which I was like, wow. That just touched me. So I want to know more about that. Tell me about Soul Expressions.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me on here. I'm really excited to be on your podcast and to share about Soul Expressions. It really, actually, I was part of a incubator called the Integral Impact Incubator at California Institute of Integral Studies last spring, and I started dreaming and envisioning this project. So it's taken almost a year to kind of go through its incubation phase and come into fruition. And I really love that you mentioned the E in parentheses, because I have a background in language poetry, and that still influences how I name things and think about the language of it and how it actually looks typed or written down. And that was really important to me, to have like an honoring of Seoul being one of the capital of South Korea, and many transnational adoptees were born there. I was actually born in Busan, but it just seemed a natural fit to have the soul that's so important to the work that I do with soul-based coaching, and really getting people in touch with that ancestral wisdom and that lineage that they come from in a more energetic and soulful place than necessarily a physical or literal place. And I wanted to have that nod in the name of the project.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's just absolutely beautiful. And so what made you start this journey, or how was it like when you started this journey and everything? Um, what transpired? Like what happened? What were some of the things that emerged from your it's like it's a journey, right? It's like, being a transnational adoptee, you were adopted by parents of European descent, correct?
Yes, in fact, my mother's maiden name is Smith, so like a classic European name. She doesn't actually know her European ancestry because of that. And then my father Myers is a very kind of common German name. So he actually, though his great grandmother was Native American, so he does have some um, more connection to the indigenous people here.
Yeah, yeah. And how does it feel like now that you're reaching back? It sounds like you're reaching back to that ancestral part of yourself, which you never grew up with, right?
Yeah, so that actually is a more recent journey for me. It started when um, just on a whim, actually, I did a Reiki training in 2020, so right before the pandemic, actually.
Mhm.
And I had been kind of anti-Reiki for a while just because it seemed really, I don't know, woo-woo, and everyone here in Marin or in the Bay Area really is like Reiki trained. So, um, so I just took it on a whim because my mentor is a Reiki master, and from the first Reiki attunement I had, I actually felt I heard my Korean name in sort of the invocation of the Reiki energy, um, which is Jinjung Mi. And it's something that has not actually felt connected to me for most of my life. I knew what it was, and um, I didn't feel like adding it into my legal name or anything because it just felt so, I guess, disconnected to me. And so the Reiki actually was the first time where I was like, wow, it's here inside of me. And it really is this kind of living, breathing lineage. And after that first Reiki attunement, I also saw my birth mother and some of the Reiki healings that I received from my teacher, and was able to like actually physically see like the outline of her body and not necessarily her face, but feel that presence. And it was something I just never felt like I would ever experience. And in fact, I did ask her if I would see her in this lifetime. And she said no, that this was kind of, you know, the connection. But it's been a journey. In my last training was the Reiki 3 one, and I actually saw all of my ancestors and my mother again with empty cups that I filled with Reiki light. And I actually had enough by that time training and stamina to fill them. And after that, I felt physically connected to the sort of material world in a way that I've never felt before. It was like all of a sudden I had these roots and I could walk differently, with more grounding, with more presence, and with more sort of commitment to being here in this lifetime.
Wow. Wow. Everything that you've explained right now in regards to Reiki, it's the I think what I understand is Reiki is kind of like the redirection and movement of energy within your body. And in Hawaii, we call that energy mana. And it's like when you're moving that, it connects you. It kind of like opens up. Like there's been a plug between you and your ancestors. And I think the way you're explaining it, it sounds like Reiki removed that plug, and that ancestral energy connected you back to your mother and your ancestors. And that is so beautiful, that feeling of connection to, wow, just to your birthplace and to your birth mother and to who you are. How did that all feel? Did that like freak you out? Because I think it would have kind of like put me in this place where it's like, how do I all of a sudden walk in these multiple worlds? Because you've walked in one world and now you're exposed to more than what you actually knew before. How did that make you feel?
I actually felt ready for it because I had been on this somatic and spiritual kind of reclaiming of my wholeness for about 5 years now. And so at the time I did the training, it had been 4 years into this journey, and I had done a lot of work previously of really connecting to my body again. And I didn't realize until like 2016, around the time that I met you and was starting the transformative studies program, that I had been so disconnected from my body. And, part of that whole mind body separation, Western indoctrination. And really, I mean, even in my undergraduate years, I would even say, that my mind was more important than my body, and I didn't really need a body because I had such a great mind. But like, so it's really been full circle, like really returning to my body and being able to feel all of my different body parts and explore the stories that were inside of them and the mythology that I had created around those stories. Kind of breaking those apart and finding out what that really meant for me through my Tamalpa Institute training and the life art process. There's actually a part that we call body parts mapping, where you take each body part separately and do a dance and movement exploration, drawing the stories that are held there in like expressive arts, 30 minutes with these Craypaw oil pastels, where you just have to kind of get something out that you've just experienced through the body and through journal reflections from the movement part. And I've also done conscious dance with open floor and 5 rhythms to help get in touch with some of the shadow material beforehand. So I feel like those prepared me to have the Reiki experiences of reconnection in a way that felt more natural and kind of gentle, and like it was the culmination of this journey that I'd been on.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And just to let everyone know too, is that Kelsay and I are doctoral students at the California Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco, California. Kelsay and I met 5-6 years ago, and I'm defending my dissertation in 2 weeks from today, which is a little crazy. And
yes.
And I mean, it's just it's crazy. And Kelsay, what is your dissertation on? What are you doing your dissertation on?
My dissertation is on it's a self-study and self-inquiry into this somatic process of healing. it's been influenced by sort of all the modalities that I've studied, particularly with the expressive arts and the somatic movement education. But I want to come up with a transdisciplinary and creative process of integration for trauma healing specifically.
How do people heal how do people heal trauma through somatics? Some people don't. Can you explain that?
Yeah, well, because trauma lives in our body and sort of happens at that physical, cellular, spiritual, and soulful levels that that are deeper than what our mind tells us, and what the mind can offer by really moving and expressing what's there through our bodies. It allows that energy that's stuck and those stories that are stuck to begin to change and transform and grow. And that's where the healing is.
That is so beautiful. You've heard of Resma Menakem. Have you?
Yes, I love his
Yes.
book.
Oh my gosh, my grandmother's hands. There's a lot of things that, just in the work that you and I do, right? It's like, for me, it's about co-creating cohesive communities. It's about living aloha. It's about doing things differently than we're doing right now. A lot of times, especially in the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is the work that I'm in, I see a lot of people, a lot of activists that comes to the table wanting to blame and shame other people without acknowledging the fact that it doesn't matter which part of this world you come from, whether you are BIPOC or a person of European descent, trauma exists within all of us. And if we're not able to meet each other with aloha, if we're not able to meet each other with grace and to understand the somatics, what we're doing is perpetuating the hurt and the harm in one another. And we're going to, if we perpetuate that harm, we're going to continue to have a world that is filled with hate and anger and stuckness. We're going to be stuck in this body that is filled with negative energy without being able to express it. And it sounds like with being a somatic educator, it sounds as if you can unstuck yourself by understanding what is happening to your body first.
Yeah, and in fact, I love that you bring up with activists specifically. There is so much to be angry about, and there is so much trauma and rage. And recently I was tapping into my own rage and anger, in fact last week, and I was like exploding on everyone in my life, my therapist, my cat, my myself, my parents. And I was like, wow, like there's so much rage here. And working with my somatic experiencing practitioner, Stacy Butcher, she just made me sit with it and feel it in my body and drop the story of, everything that was infuriating me and frustrating me, and really just feel it in my body, let it be there, and then feel into the parts that had shifted, that, did feel good, that did feel calm, even with, the parts that were still raging. And just through that 1 hour session, I was able to move the rage so that I haven't felt it since, last week, and was able to really, be in that calm, more present, more me state this week, without the triggers. And of course, it's been 5 years working with her, so it's a little bit easier and quicker for me to go to that place. But it took a lot of work in the beginning to get there. And again, that's where so much healing is, because we are in a very traumatized world, and people are anxious, frustrated, angry, and they're for good reasons. And there is, there is more. There is that. There's also what brings us peace and what makes us feel good in our bodies and in our lives, that, to balance things out so that we can have a healthier, more whole existence.
Yeah, it is so important, I feel, to acknowledge those emotions, right? Not suppress the emotions, but feel those emotions. And I think, it's like, you're saying that it took you 5 years. I mean, well, you've been doing the practice for 5 years. And so there are individuals who haven't had practice. So it's like when they feel that anger, it is outwards, right? It's towards other people. And it's also important that those of us who has had these practices, when we see that, to not shame that person either, into the fact that, oh, look at that person. That person is like so angry, they need to control themselves, or whatever it is, right? It's like, I think we've learned to have the grace and the understanding that when we see someone that is what we would consider out of control, is that we can still have empathy towards that individual when we understand that that person don't have the tools. They don't have the tools to find that space, to find it within their bodies, or even be able to hold it in their bodies, because they could be a cup full of rage. And when it is like overflowing and you don't have any place to redirect that, it's going to come out in ways that we may not understand. And can you imagine if our systems that are in place right now, especially with law enforcement, that if they had a little bit more empathy and compassion when they see someone, maybe they wouldn't be so triggered themselves, because triggers trigger other people, hurt people, right? It's like, but healed people also heal people. But we've got to be able to step in between that lines of what's happening, what is it that we're seeing and what's really happening to an individual. Because I've seen it happen so many times, and I've read it, we've read so many, we've been exposed to so many articles and so many stories of how you would see a person that is not able to release the anger and the rage except for what they know how. So there's a lot of things that we could do in this world to create a different place. But I guess it sounds like it all starts with ourselves.
I think so, because again, as you were saying, hurt people hurt other people. And if, we're able to be with that hurt and not either turn it on ourselves or turn it on other people, then we can offer more of ourselves to the world, and also see people with that compassion that you were mentioning. I think, the foundation of the work that I do is really about, as Grace Lee and Jimmy Bogg said, being more human beings. And it sounds so simple, but it's not actually easy, because so much of our culture, so much of our education, so much of the experience we have in the world wants to take our humanity from us and make it so that we don't see other people as human beings, but as like what they have of value for us, as a product, as anything other than another person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. We've been conditioned to remove that humanity, that peace where we can actually see each other for who we are. We've put a lot of processes and practices into place as if it's like we're robots, input and output, but not the intricacies and the nuances of being human beings that are full of emotion.
Yes.
So it's a little crazy on how we see each other, right? We see each other and we know that, okay, that's another person, but do we actually see the humanity in other people? And I think when we pause and we engage in dialogue and conversation, like we're doing right now, and to just really listen, right? And the ability to listen, not just with our ears, but with our hearts. When we're able to listen to our hearts, we can step into the stories that is being told, and we can ebb and flow in between, what the storyteller's telling us and the words behind of that. We can see the emotions and feel the emotions. When we're in touch with our own bodies and understand our own emotions, we can feel the emotions of other people. That's a strong energy. That's a strong energy that can happen in between two individuals. What do you think about that?
I agree. I think what being in our body offers us is connection on multiple levels. It starts with the connection to our own emotions, to our own wants and needs, to our own bodies, and then having that connection restored allows us to connect to other people, to spirits, to nature, to the world that we're in. And that's also what I want to help restore to transnational adoptees with soul expressions, specifically is that connection on all different levels that really has been fragmented and broken and severed from that physical separation from our birth mother and from our homeland.
Tell me more about that. Tell me more on how you want to work with transnational adoptees.
Yeah, so I really wanted to work with transnational adoptees because that is, I'm a Korean adoptee, and I have been able to be connected in ways that I know other adoptees are still struggling with, that, they feel so isolated and disconnected from their culture, from Korea, from, the loss of their birth families and this lineage. And I used to think I didn't need it, but actually having that restored through the embodiment practices, through the energy work and ancestral connection has, like I said, it's offered me healing that I didn't even know I was missing. And for many adoptees, they are actively in pain because they know it's missing, and they aren't disconnected from that pain. So I want to help kind of change that narrative for them in the ways that I can, because even if we can't travel to Korea right now, and even if that's not possible, there are ways to embody that sort of energetic and metaphorical place to make it alive in their cells, in their memories, that can offer more healing and more wholeness than I ever thought possible, and that I want them to experience as well.
When you you said that you needed healing that you didn't think that you needed. When did you figure out, or when did you know that you needed to have that healing?
Yeah, so I've also trained with the Academy for Soul-Based Coaching that was started by Annemiek van Helsding in the Netherlands, actually. And it uses David Grove's clean language of really moving the interpretation of symbols or images that people see in their minds, and just allowing it to be and have that, have the meaning just kind of happen at the cellular level, at the physical level, without even necessarily knowing what it means or what's happening, but just kind of allowing that process to unfold. And in one of the soul-based coaching sessions I was receiving, actually from my friend Rebecca Eklund, it was like the weirdest thing, but I actually like saw myself swallow this pearl, like kind of like ingest it. And then it transported me to this clearing in a woods that I felt like was in Korea, like in Busan, that was sort of my ancestral homeland. And when I first got there, it was like very overgrown and messy and kind of like, everything, it was weeds and everything was entangled. And then as as the session kept going, I went to this shoreline and took this other portal of a seashell that kind of grew. And I heard this voice, probably of an ancestor, say that, this work that I'm doing is planting the seed, and that eventually it will grow and be as strong as I want it to. And then when I exited the seashell back on the shore and went into the clearing, it looked like a garden, and there was like a huge tree that was in like its kind of like last stages of life. It was like in full huge trunk, lots of branches and leaves, with a swing that I actually swung on, and sort of felt that joy and reconnection to my purpose and to my path. And I don't know if this is answering your question, but that that experience was so vivid and so rich and so healing for me that I was like, okay, I have to be able to do this work with other adoptees. And I just felt called to share that with adoptees specifically.
How are things now that you're reaching back to your ancestral homelands? How is that with your family, with your parents, now that you're on this journey, on this path?
They've been really supportive. And in fact, when I was in high school, my mom made sure that I knew if I ever wanted to do a birth parent search, that they, supported me, and, that there wasn't any issue with that for them. And I had thought about it, but I know how difficult it is and how little information there is, and how whole, lies on adoption files anyway, in order to actively not reunite adoptees. So I didn't ever pursue it. And in fact, I was told in our transformative studies program that I should do that, because it might be like a hole in my research if I didn't do that. But my advisor was like, that's not a reason to do a birth parent search. So I kind of put that on hold, though I had thought maybe I would do my first return trip to Korea and do some research, and then COVID happened. So I was like, okay, that's not going to happen. And what I was given were these, soul-based coaching and Reiki like visions of that allowed that restoration at a level that I don't necessarily know would happen even if I had gone back to Korea.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see and to know on how, when it does happen, when you are in the physical realm of Korea and you're taking the dream realm together and bringing it together, right? It's like, that's going to be really interesting on the process of what you're going to go through, the emotions and the somatic responses that your body is going to have when you are in the physical place which is going to be really interesting. Now, growing up in an all-white family, and I'm sure that, with other transnational adoptees, they probably have, I mean, I don't know, I'm not a transnational adoptee, but I'm always curious on at what point in your life did you realize that you were a woman of color versus a person of European descent? Was there any kind of friction that happened in that part of your life?
Yeah, so I did, of course, get teased on the playground, but I could forget about those really easily because my parents, talked to the principal, and then, the kids stopped teasing me. Um, and so I didn't actually have to think about it till I went away to college and, was out of my small town of 6,000 people in Lowell, Michigan. That's very small, and everyone knew me and my father. And so when I went to college was the first time that I started having all of these microaggressions, and just everybody was starting to comment on my race, and I had never had to think about it before, and just having it sort of this constant barragement of people in the cafeteria, of people on the street, of all these questions, the "where are you from" question that I had never actually had before because everybody knew.
Right,
Growing
right.
up, it was very triggering for me. And then when I was 19, I had my first sort of like go back to China, incident of people actually, actively screaming at me. And that was a huge awakening for me. It was my first kind of experience of not knowing who I was anymore, because I had identified as sort of, I had thought of myself as a white person, or I mean, anything other than Asian. Like, I loved Jennifer Lopez growing up, and I was like, oh, I kind of look like her. So she was a role model. But I mean, I would look at myself in the mirror and think that I was a white person, even though I could see that obviously I was Asian. There was this weird mental disconnect until I had those experiences in college. And it really kind of shattered my whole existence. And most of my 20s, I was like, oh, I'm this fragmented, like abstract piece of artwork that, I'm literally just creating myself, which was how I felt, but also not necessarily real.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure, right? It's like I always have to sit back with my own identity, right? It's like I grew up, I was born and raised in Hawaii. I'm connected to the land, I'm connected to my ancestors, I'm connected to my family. And that's what I know. And for a long time, I thought everybody was like that. Everybody was connected to the land the way I am. Everyone's connected to their ancestors, but it's not, right? And so it's like when I met my husband, who's white, and he doesn't know where his ancestry is from, right? The furthest that he can go is that, oh yeah, my grandmother was in Tennessee. And I was like, yeah, but what about before that? Where'd you all come from, right? Where did it go? And he had to work towards decolonizing himself. And, it's like seeing these fragmented parts of individuals. I'm finding it really interesting because when you're able to have all of those tiny little pieces that make up who you are, and you love and honor all of those tiny little pieces that make up who you are, then you have that wholeness of who you are in regards to your identity. But I'm sure that as we all are, right, is we're still trying to figure out how do we identify and how do we connect back to ancestry. So how are you working towards that ancestral healing in your life right now?
Yeah, so I actually, one of my Tamalpa Institute teachers, Joey Lee, who's my supervisor for the Soul Expressions project, is a Korean shaman. And so the classes that we had with her, she did infuse with specifically Korean energy and sort of spiritual practices. And that kind of opened my world to these literally Korean spiritual practices that felt so natural to me. And so working with her and experiencing her workshops and classes is one way that I'm keeping that alive, as well as continuing my own Reiki, self Reiki practice and connection to that energy and my lineage through my arts practices. Like drawing has become actually kind of an intuitive process for me. Even in my note taking now, I will do kind of intuitive based drawings that feel very connected to my ancestry and to my lineage and to that sort of line that goes through the core of my body and connects me to the land.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And these are some of the things that you will be working with other transnational adoptees as they're trying to figure out their healing as well too.
Yes, so I will be offering the arts-based kind of visualizations and somatic work to the adoptees to help them come to their own metaphors and their own visions that connect them to themselves and to their ancestors and ultimately to Korea, to restore that those things that have been fragmented and severed.
That is beautiful, Kelsay. And as I'm listening to you, share all of this wisdom that you've accumulated throughout the years, right? It's for a long time. You've been accumulating all of this wisdom. You fall in line with the 5 phases of decolonization. And so Pokala Inui, he is an attorney and activist and pretty much the heart of my work in my dissertation as the 5 phases of decolonization. So the first phase is rediscover and recover. And that's exactly what I feel that you continue to do, is rediscover and recover that connection, that ancestral lineage, that heritage that was severed. You are finding the roots that connects you back to it, right? So the rediscover and recover. From that is the mourning. And the mourning is about knowing that there's still so much more to learn, so much more to unpack as you not dismiss growing up in a European family, but acknowledging and healing from that place where you were severed from, and still loving and looking at all of those small little fragments of yourself and still loving part of that, and realizing that there's going to be parts where you're still going to be there. There'll be anger, there'll be rage, right? And there's mourning. But in the third phase is dreaming. And girl, you have reached out into the place where in our Western ideologies, we look at this third space as some place that doesn't exist. But for individuals who understand that in the dreaming realm is where we can connect with everything that is outside of our everyday being, and our cells down to the molecular level connects in that dream place. So you're in that dreaming. The last 2 is commitment and action. And your commitment and action to working with other transnational adoptees, so that way they can find their roots back to their homeland, is so important. And that ancestral knowledge, that wisdom that comes from the dream world into our present world, into this world, is where it connects us all. And I just wish that with all of these modalities that we're speaking about, we don't hear this in our Western European universities or in our schools. We don't talk about these third places. We don't talk about these sacred spaces that a lot of us, well, not a lot of us, but those of us that understand about the mind, the body, and the connection to the ether is non-existent in our Western world. If we were able to all speak about this, then we would all be working towards decolonizing ourselves, our mind, our bodies, and our soul to reach back, right? To reach back and connect to each other's soul. So that way we can see the humanity in one another and all of the fragmented pieces that each of us carry. And what a beautiful way of, the things that you're doing and bringing healing to yourself and to others. And when you're bringing healing to yourself, you're bringing healing to your families. When you're helping other people heal, they'll help other people heal, and then so on and so on. And before we know it, we'll have a healed world. How fucking awesome is that, right?
Awesome. Yes.
So if transnational adoptees want to get a hold of you, how can they find you?
Yes, they can find me at my website, www.dialogicalpersona.com.
Dialogicalpersona.com. Okay.
Yeah, and so I have an email form that they can reach me there. I also share my email, and all of my social media accounts are linked to there. So that's the easiest way to find me everywhere.
Nice. And you're currently taking clients right now?
I am currently taking clients for all of my coaching programs, as well as specifically if you're a Korean adoptee or adopted person or displaced person. In January, I'm starting up the Soul Expressions, which is free for January to June, and I'm offering one-to-one weekly 90-minute coaching sessions individually, and then monthly group workshops in that.
Nice. What's your other coaching? What are the other coaching things that are you doing right now?
So I have a 6-month program called Write, Embody, Heal that uses sort of all of the modalities I've studied and kind of meets people exactly where they're at with what they need each session. And then I also have Mirrors of the Soul, which is specifically to Tumulpa Institute Life Art Practice coaching in 3 and 6 month packages.
Nice. And all of that information is on your website?
Yes, it's all there.
Great. Okay. So yeah, what I'll do is I'll make sure that everyone, it's like when I put this out and everything, I'll make sure that your information and everything is on there. Right now, it's like, it's like the Mixed Plate podcast is still very new, but the way that I look at it is like, okay, so what? I have 50 listeners right now. I am looking at it as if I have 1 million listeners, right? And my whole goal and my hope is that as the Mixed Plate podcast becomes more popular, then everyone else that has been on this, I have the opportunity to rise and pick up their voices as well too. So I'm so happy that you were willing to come onto this podcast, Kelsay. And it's like it's been so long since you and I hung out together. You actually taught me how to use Uber Eats, DoorDash.
Oh yes, I'm very good at that. I teach a lot of people that.
I remember being at your house over when you were in Walnut Creek, and it's like we just DoorDashed everything.
I do cook a little bit more here, but DoorDash is still my main way of eating.
Oh my gosh, that was just so much. That was a lot of fun. That was. I'm like, what is DoorDash? And then it's like I've never got over DoorDash. So it's been great. So thank you so much for being on the Mixed Plate podcast. You have been listening to the Mixed Plate podcast. It is a Plowline production, and tune in for the next episode. And don't forget to subscribe to the Mixed Plate podcast, available on all popular podcast platforms. And please join us in continuing this work by becoming a supporter and heading over to the Patreon page at patreon.com/mixedplate. Your contributions will go directly toward production and building engagement content. So we look forward to having you again. And Kelsay, thank you again so much for being here. We definitely need to reconnect. I need to come over to your new place. Your last place was pretty kick-ass, so I can imagine that this place is just as kick-ass as the other one. So thank you everyone for joining us, and until next time, ahui ho, take care of each other, love each other, and we will see you soon.